So bear with me a little bit. I've got a sinus infection going on, so my voice is a little bit messed up. But I'm going to be going over the cognitive behavioral therapy or cognitive behavioral theory with you guys. In the book, it is expressed as the cognitive theory or cognitive therapy. Um, and I started off here with a demonstration showing the cognitive triangle about how like feelings become thoughts and thoughts become behaviors. And then I also have a quote here by Anne Napawan, if hopefully I said that right. And it says, in a nutshell, the CBT approach works by evaluating and finding new ways to respond to automatic thought processes or patterns. She says patterns, but I see it more as thought processes. Okay, so who created it, or where it was created? I kind of went back and looked at the like the progression when it comes to theories before cognitive theory and about how they kind of led up to the development of cognitive theory. So it began with Albert Ellis. He was born in 1913 through 2007. He was born in Pittsburgh, later residing in New York City, and he came up with rational emotive emotive behavioral therapy, or otherwise known as REBT, in 1955. The reason why I feel it's important to document this is because it is known as the parent of today's cognitive behavioral approaches. It had an emphasis on thinking, assessing, deciding, analyzing, and doing. People contribute to their own psychological problems as well as the symptoms by the rigid and extreme beliefs they hold about the events or situations. Ellis gave credit to the preceded thoughts, such as those of Alfred Adler, as an influential precursor of REBT. Karen Horney, she had ideas in the 1950s and acknowledged the depth of some of the Eastern philosophers and ancient Greeks who stated years ago that people are disturbed not by events but by the views they take in which they take of them. This leads me to bring up Aaron T. Beck and Judith Beck, who developed cognitive theory or cognitive therapy. It was developed at the same time as Ellis's REBT. But it was based on empirical research, and there's an emphasis on education and prevention, using specific methods tailored to particular issues, and it's set to create an evidence-based therapy for depression. They were originally, as we'll talk about a little bit more later on, they were originally looking at individuals who suffered from depression, and that's how cognitive theory came about. Additionally, I think it's notable to talk about Christine. I might butcher these names, so bear with me. But to talk about Christine Padsky or Padsky, she developed the strength-based cognitive behavioral therapy in 1953. And strength-based cognitive behavioral therapy is a variant of Aaron Beck's cognitive therapy. It was developed by her and her colleague, and all the principles and evidence-based treatments developed by Aaron Beck and his colleagues are incorporated in the strength-based cognitive behavioral therapy. But this therapy is also empirically based, and strength-based cognitive behavioral therapies help clients develop a construct and a new positive way of interacting in the world. And lastly, I'll mention, once again, I will probably butcher this name, but I will mention Donald Mach- Machenbaum, Machenbaum, and he came up with cognitive behavioral modification in 2017, which combines some of the best elements of behavioral theory and cognitive theory. It's a base premise of his cognitive behavioral modification is that clients become aware of how they think and how they feel and how they behave and how that impacts on the change that occurs in them. And this approach shares with REBT and Beck's cognitive therapy the assumption that the distressing emotions are often a result of maladaptive thoughts or maladaptive cognitive thoughts. That's where the cognitive aspects comes into play. All right, so more about Aaron Beck's cognitive therapy. Um, it came about in the 1960s, specifically. The book mentions 1963, 1967. He set out to create an evidence-based therapy for depression. His original depression research revealed that depressed clients had a negative bias in their interpretation of certain life events, which resulted from active process of cognitive distortion. Which later we'll talk more about cognitive distortions and give examples of those as well. All right, so Aaron Beck, he uh, his original depression research revealed that the depressed clients had a significant negative bias on their interpretation of certain life events, which resulted from an active process of cognitive distortion, which we'll talk about cognitive distortions here in a little bit. But this led Beck to believe that the therapy that helped depressed clients become aware of and change their negative thinking could be helpful. So one of Beck's early contributions to recognize that regardless of the cause of depression, once people become depressed, their thinking is reflected. So he came up with a negative cognitive triad, which pretty much says that they have a negative view of their self, a negative view of the world, and a negative view of the future. He also came up with three theoretical, theor- I can't pronounce anything right, but theoretical assumptions of cognitive therapy, and that is that people's thought processes are accessible to introspection, that people's beliefs have highly personal meanings, and that people can discover these meanings themselves rather than having to be taught or having to be interpreted by the therapist. So, additionally, this slide might be a little bit a little full, but Aaron Beck's cognitive therapy, he also exhibited the genetic cognitive model, which describes principles that pertain to all cognitive therapy applications, from depression to anxiety treatments to therapies for a wide variety of other problems, including psychosis and substance use. Beck believed that the genetic cognitive model, has the potential to be empirically supported general theory of psychopathology. So there were several principles when it comes to the genetic cognitive model as demonstrated by Beck. Um, so the principles that led to this model include the psychological distress can be thought of as an exaggeration of normal adaptive human functioning, which pretty much means that the psychological disorder begins when the normal emotions and behaviors become disproportionate to life events in a degree of frequency. Additionally, faulty information processing is a prime cause of exaggeration in adaptive emotional and behavioral reactions, which pretty much is broken down to thinking is directly connected to our emotional reactions, behaviors, and motivation. And when we think about things in erroneous or distorted ways, we experience exaggerated or distorted emotional and behavioral reflections, or not reflections, reactions as well. Another principle of this model is that our beliefs play a major role in determining what type of psychological distress we will experience. Additionally, central to cognitive therapy is the empirically supported observation that change in belief leads to change in behavior and emotion. That's where we go back to that triangle that I showed on the first slide. That if there is a change in a belief or a feeling, then there can be a change in a thought that would lead to a change in a behavior. So, like I said earlier, there are cognitive distortions that Beck identifies, and these are a list of the popular cognitive distortions that he identifies. So, there's arbitrary inferences, which is like castrating or like thinking the absolute worst. There is selective obstruction, which means that like That would be if someone like measured their worth based upon their weaknesses, highlighting their weaknesses instead of taking into consideration their strengths. Um, then there is overgeneralization, which means like holding extreme beliefs about things or extreme beliefs about yourself, rather than being like realistic. There's personalization, which means relating extreme things that are happening in one's life to themselves, or like personalizing, terrible things that might be happening in someone's life. And then there's labeling or mislabeling, which is whenever somebody like labels themselves based upon the mistakes that they've made. And then there's dichotomous, which is more dichotomous thinking, which is like a black or white thinking. Either I'm this way or I'm that way. Either I'm good or I'm bad, or I'm productive or I'm not productive. Things like that. So, some more about cognitive therapy. It perceives psychological problems as an exaggeration of adaptive responses resulting from commonplace cognitive distortions. So, Beck really placed a lot of emphasis on cognitive distortions as the basis of cognitive issues that individuals experience when it comes to the thinking aspect of the triangle that I mentioned. So, the cognitive aspect leads to feelings, which leads to behaviors. So, cognitive therapy is an insight focused therapy with a strong psychoeducational component and emphasis recognizing and changing unrealistic thoughts and maladaptive beliefs. So, the overall goal of cognitive therapy is to help clients learn practical skills that they can use to make changes in their thoughts, behaviors, and emotions, and how to sustain these changes over time. All right, so what need did it fill? Cognitive therapy is an evidence supported therapy. I know that whenever I viewed the slide on behavioral theory, I saw that it was also as an evidence based theory, and cognitive behavioral therapy was developed from behavioral theory. And so it is also an evidence based theory. Um, uh, I know that they mentioned the comparison between psychoanalytic or psychoanalytic theory, how it was hard to have like an uh, evidence-based, I guess, something to to work with when it came to viewing the repercussions of this therapy and how effective it can be. But so it is an evidence-based, evidence-supported therapy. Approaches were developed for many disorders, including depression, panic disorder, social anxiety, phobia, schizophrenia, and other psychotic disorders, including dysmorphic disorder, eating disorders, insomnia, anger issues, stress, chronic pain, fatigue, distress due to general medical problems such as cancer, etc. This disorder really looks at a wide variety of cognitive processes and how they can influence one's feelings and one's behaviors. So, why was it created and how did it differ or expand from other theories? Cognitive theory expanded from the beliefs of Ellis, and it was developed at the same time. It's an evidence-supported cognitive theory approaches were developed for many disorders, like I just explained, like depression, schizophrenia, eating disorders, very variety of disorders were used as a basis of the needs being fulfilled. Um, Cognitive theory has a limited of similarities to both REBT and behavioral therapy, but all of these theories are active, directive, time limited, present centered, problem oriented, collaborative, constructive, and empirical. Similar to REBT and unlike behavioral theory, cognitive therapy is based on the theoretical, I can't say this, but the rationale that the way that people feel and behave is influenced by how they perceive and place meaning on their experiences. So REBT is often highly directive, while cognitive therapy places more emphasis on helping clients identify misconceptions for themselves rather than being taught. So it kind of puts the ball in their court and allows them to identify some cognitive distortions that they might be experiencing and how they are implemented in their life and how they bleed over into their current behaviors, whether they be adaptive or maladaptive behaviors. All right, so um, I'm not going to be able to pronounce his name correctly, but he developed cognitive behavioral modification. And I thought that it was worth mentioning or bringing to the attention when it comes to cognitive behavioral theory or cognitive therapy, because he proposed a three phase process of change. And those the three phases are self observation, starting a new internal dialogue, and learning new skills. And he adopted the beliefs of Beck when it comes to cognitive therapy, and used those beliefs and implemented them into cognitive behavioral modification, which I'm not going to talk a lot about, but I thought that it was worth mentioning that his three-phase process to change, since one of the questions for our project is how was change exhibited. So he also looked at a cognitive narrative approach to cognitive behavioral therapy, and in this approach, he looked at there we go. He looked at that is perceived, which focuses on, he looked at the plots, characters, and themes in the stories that people tell about themselves. This approach begins with the assumption that there are multiple realities. We're all storytellers, and that we should be aware of the stories that we tell about ourselves. And therapists help clients appreciate how they construct reality and examine the implications and conclusions clients draw from their stories. Clients can move from being victims to survivors, and he used various questions. There's various questions that are used to evaluate the outcome of therapy. All right, so cognitive behavioral therapy from a multicultural perspective. Cognitive behavioral therapy tends to be culturally sensitive because it uses the individual's belief system or worldview as part of a method of self exploration. There's interventions that are tailored to the unique needs and strengths of an individual. Clients are empowered by learning specific skills that they can apply in daily life. There's inner resources and strengths of clients are activated to bring about change in their life. And then clients make changes that minimize stressors, increase personal strength and support, and establish skills for dealing more effectively with their physical and social cultural environments. All right. So when did this come about? So early in 1955, Albert Ellis developed an approach for psychotherapy called the rational therapy, and later rational emotive therapy, and which is now known as REBT, which is known as the parent of cognitive behavioral approaches. 1950s, 1960s, cognitive therapy was started around the same time as REBT. In 1977, I'm going to butcher his name, so I'll let you guys pronounce that. He proposed phases of change in an effort to show cognitive behavioral modification. And then in 2015, he embraced a cognitive narrative perspective, like I mentioned earlier. All right, so some key concepts. Key concepts with REBT, or rational emotive behavioral therapy, is based on the premise that we learn irrational beliefs from significant others during childhood, and then we recreate these irrational beliefs throughout lifetime. Um, I talk a lot about REBT because it is like they kind of laid the foundation that led into cognitive behavioral therapy. But it is largely on our own repetition of early indoctrinated irrational beliefs rather than parents' repetition that keeps dysfunctional attitudes alive and operate within us. Blame is the core of many emotional disturbances. This is all according to Ellis. We must fully accept ourselves and our imperfections rather than blaming ourselves and others. And there's three basic musts or rational beliefs that we internalize that lead to self-defeat. Um, I must do well to be loved and approved by others. Others must treat me fairly, kindly, and well. And the world in my living conditions must be comfortable, gratifying, and just providing me with all that I want in life. Um, Additionally, some key concepts. Well, I can't go back to the previous slide, but I just highlighted that Beck in 1963 and 1967 set out to create an evidence based theory for depression, and he tested each of his theory constructs with empirical studies and conducted controlled outcome studies to determine how cognitive therapy outcomes compared with existing psychotherapy and pharmacotherapy treatments for depression. It was evidence supported cognitive therapy approaches were developed for many disorders, like I mentioned earlier, including depression, schizophrenia, chronic pain, fatigue, anger issues, etc. Christine Podesky and Kathleen Mooney developed strength-based cognitive behavioral therapy, which involves three current applications, including an add-on for the classical CBT, a four-step model to build resilience and other positive qualities, and a new paradigm for chronic difficulties and personal disorders. Strength-based cognitive behavioral therapy, like I know we didn't talk about that a lot tonight, but it helps clients identify their strengths and rely on them whenever helpful to guide therapy choices. And then the basis of cognitive behavioral modification is that clients must become aware of how they feel and how they think, how they feel, and how they behave, and how they impact they have on others before change can occur. Okay, so what causes hurt or what causes suffering? CBT says that individuals create their own experience and pain included, and by changing their negative thoughts and behaviors, people can change their awareness of pain and develop better coping skills, even if the actual level of pain stays the same. And what promotes change? According to cognitive behavioral therapy is a type of talk therapy in which you work with mental health counselor and it means to become aware of inaccurate or negative thinking so that you can view challenging situations more clearly. Change occurs when an individual can approach it can I said approach can approach and alter negative ways of thinking to create new behaviors. And then according to I'll try to pronounce it, Machenbaum, 1977, behavior change occurs through a sequence of meditating processes involving the interaction of inner speech, cognitive structures, and behaviors and their resilient outcomes. All right, and here is y'all's interactive quiz. What was known as the parent of cognitive behavioral therapy, or who was known as the parent of cognitive behavioral therapy? What are the three aspects of negative cognitive triad? What are the three theoretical assumptions of cognitive therapy? What are the principles of generic cognitive model? And then what are five cognitive distortions?